Chapter 28.
The Progressive Era. Introduction. In this lecture, you learn about the Progressive Era, a 30-year period of reform which became so pervasive and far-reaching that it eventually became mainstream, its daring themes enthusiastically embraced by the American people and the administrations of two powerful presidents. The Progressive Era was the natural political reaction to the failure of the populist movement to acquire power in the election of 1896. Reform-minded Americans, disturbed by the country's economic inequalities and social ills, took up the populist themes again, expanded upon them, built coalitions to advertise their ideas, and went on a new crusade to bring the country back to political and economic opportunity for all. The urgency of their cause was motivated by three practical problems which they intended to fix, and you will learn what those problems were. Then we will briefly meet 10 of the most influential reformers who kicked off the movement, none of them politicians, and note the diversity of the issues they were working on. You will learn where these altruistic warriors came from, what their common interests were, and how they intended to make a difference. Next, you will learn 11 specific reforms the Progressives managed to bring to fruition, 10 of which became accepted law and practice to this day, and 3 of which were enshrined as amendments to the Constitution. Women contributed as much to the progress of the progressive movement as men did, and you will learn 4 ways that they amplified its success. Even the Supreme Court was affected by the progressive movement. They ruled for the Progressives in 2 landmark cases that improved conditions in the workplace for millions of Americans. You will learn about that as well. By the time all of this had been done, the progressive movement had reached the big time, so that even presidential candidates were paying attention to it. President Theodore Roosevelt embraced the Progressives' goals wholeheartedly, designed his own reform agenda around theirs, and used what he called his bully pulpit and his big stick to get things done to his satisfaction. He created whole new departments in the federal government, pushed legislation through Congress, leaned on monopolistic trusts to persuade them to use their controlling economic power in the public interest, and busted them up, or threatened to do so, if they didn't. He made a personal crusade out of protecting the public's health, and inaugurated what became the National Park Service, so that Americans could enjoy the pristine beauty of their country, if and when they ever got a vacation. These were all goals of the Progressives. In this lecture you will learn all about it in depth and detail. You will also learn how and why implementing the Progressives' agenda, as needed as it was still always a compromise, even for an enthusiastic reformer like Theodore Roosevelt. Roosevelt's successor in the White House, William Howard Taft, compromised even Roosevelt's compromises, yet worked behind the scenes at the same time to implement the progressive agenda in his own quiet way, and in the end he even enlarged upon it. You will learn how and why Taft chose this path. His decisions and his methods had political consequences in the national election of 1912, however, which put Democrat Woodrow Wilson in the White House. Far from disadvantaging the Progressives, though, this sea change in national politics only meant that a new progressive sheriff was in town, because Wilson had been paying attention to the national mood. After changing the drapes in the Oval Office and the name on the door, he embarked on his own zealous version of the progressive agenda. Wilson's methods for implementing that agenda were different from Roosevelt's and from Taft's, a difference explained by his Democratic roots, and, to the Progressives' delight, Wilson's methods tended to be even more in tune with their own grassroots political style than Roosevelt's big stick and bully pulpit politics had been. Wilson had 3 big goals on his progressive agenda, and you will learn what they were and how well he succeeded in achieving them. As his presidency matured, he added more goals too, and solidified his legacy as a progressive president. As consuming as all of that was, however, Wilson also had a lot more on his plate than domestic reform. He also had the challenge of creating a workable foreign policy for the country at a time when the rest of the world was embroiled in the last throes of the last act of the drama of European colonialism. President Taft's foreign policy had turned out to be ineffectual at best, and Roosevelt's foreign policy was meaningless without the force of his powerful personality. Wilson had to start from scratch. You will learn about the global challenges he faced and what he did to try and exert, or rather re-exert, American power on the world stage. One of his challenges was how to respond to the outbreak of World War I, a conflagration which consumed all of Europe, and Great Britain too, starting in 1913, only a year into his first term. Both Wilson and the American people wanted ardently to stay out of that war, and Wilson even campaigned in the next presidential election in 1916 on the fact that he had succeeded in doing just that. Then the muse of history frowned and scowled on the progressive professor-president and plunged the country into the bloody imbroglio anyway. How could this happen in the enlightened world of the progressive era? In this lecture you will learn the answer and why the Great War, as it came to be called, put the bookend on the country's most ardent attempt at universal national reform, that unforgettable 20-year period called the Progressive Era.